Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us for another live session. My name is Manny, and today we have the pleasure of being graced with one of the senior lighters from Naughty Dog, Boon Cotter. Before we switch everything over to him, I'm going to do a couple of things. First and foremost, Happy New Year to everybody. Once again, thank you for joining us. Hope 2017 is treating you right. Here stateside, some people might not think so, but that's for another conversation. As you guys know, if you've done these sessions with us before, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat window, and I'll shoot those over to Boon, as we go through the session. If you're experiencing a lower quality video, you could always watch it through YouTube. I believe for you guys, it's in the lower right hand corner, so you can see it there. We're gonna have tons, of these sessions coming up over the next few months. So definitely make sure to look out for that. So I'm just gonna shut up now, and I'm gonna switch things over to Boon. Boon, take it away. And once again, thank you for taking time, taking your weekend to share with us and, kind of join in on the session.
Oh man, my pleasure. I'm really excited about this. I think there's a shortage of lighting info out there, and I found this when I was trying to learn how to do this kind of stuff. It was difficult to find great resources, and hopefully I can help fix that a little and put some of what I do out there and what we do at Naughty Dog, and talk about our processes and our approach and how we get the results we get. I mean, that is the goal. I mean, should I talk a little about how I stared, where I began?
I mean, give us a little introduction, in terms of how you got started. Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I'll try to keep it fairly short, but I'll go back to I was 3 years old. No, I'm not going to go back that far.
Yeah.
I'd say I probably started in this field. I was in high school in 1994, way back, and studying art. And my art teacher showed me two Pixar films. It was Red's Dream, the one about the unicycle, and Tin Toy. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I love this thing. So my school was really cool, and they set me up with an Amiga 500 back in the day with Imagine 3D. And I spent some time playing with that, and kind of just got addicted at that point. And from there forward, I've always been a gamer, so it was definitely games that I wanted to get into, but opportunity seemed a little bit difficult. I mean, it's Australia didn't seem to have a great deal of avenues, especially back then. How did you get into video games? There was no big AAA companies back then, really. I mean, EA existed, but this wasn't a time when people were putting multi-million-dollar games on the market. Film seemed like the better approach for me career-wise, so that's what I focused on. I went to college, and I went to college late. I worked for a while, and at some point decided that no, I'm not chasing my dreams. I'm going to go to college and be really broke and live on ramen for 4 years.
We've all been there.
Yeah, right. But it's character building. So I studied communication design, which kind of focused on web design and some animation. And this was before all of this stuff was really huge. I mean, YouTube didn't even exist back then. So it was difficult to find resources online. The course that I studied seemed like the right thing to do, and it certainly gave me an avenue. I kind of spent my time focusing on 3D animation, and at the time I was really interested in characters. I liked character rigging and animation and character skinning and kind of very technical kind of work. And I wrote some small scripts and some tools and so on, and I got a job in TV actually. I worked on I don't even want to say this. I worked on Animalia, this children's animated TV series. I went on as a character rigger, and when my contract ended, I didn't want to not be unemployed anymore. So I looked around at what else people were doing in the studio, and lighting really stuck to me. I loved it. I liked photography. I'm not particularly good at photography. I'm trying to be better, but I very much enjoyed lighting. I liked what it did. I liked that it took a scene with these this art that other people have produced, and it kind of elevated it and showcased it and shaped it and gave it form and character and mood, and it seemed really significant and spoke to me in a way. So I taught myself lighting more or less. As I said, there weren't a lot of resources back then, so just lots and lots of reading and practice and trying to copy photographs a lot. I'd see a photograph and I'd produce a basic model of the photograph and then try to copy the lighting, which I still do today. I think that's a really good exercise. From there, I did some VFX work on Baz Luhrmann's Australia, which shouldn't be surprising being Australian. As I said, there's only about 7 of us, so we do work on those things a lot. And from there, I ended up at Chrome Studios, which at the time was, I think, the world's biggest independent game developer. It was certainly Australia's biggest game studio, but then the global financial crisis hit, unfortunately, and as we know, that hit a lot of the creative industries really hard. And that ended. I did some time teaching and bounced around all over the place. So this certainly hasn't been a straight path. It's been a very windy path. And then Naughty Dog, which I like telling this story because to me it kind of emphasizes that people should definitely go after what they want to do. I think it was midnight one night, and I of course always wanted to work at Naughty Dog. I played The Last of Us, and I'll explain why The Last of Us really talked to me so significantly and why Naughty Dog was absolutely where I needed to be. But what was I up to? Yeah, so it was, I don't know, it was late one night and I was like, well, I'm not ready to apply, but I'm going to apply. I'm going to send an email off, and what is to lose? So I sent an email off and they sent me a lighting test. I did the test, and then it kind of all just ran from there. I got a phone call and flew over for an interview, which FYI, my first time out of Australia. So I jumped on a plane and flew to LA, and I felt like I was Crocodile Dundee, throwing cans at people that were stealing handbags or something. I don't know. But actually, I felt like I was in GTA. It was the weirdest thing. I walk around LA and I'm like, oh my God, I think I beat someone up and stole their wallet on that corner. You know? And yes, I had the interview, and they liked me and they hired me, and that's how I ended up at Naughty Dog. So it's all a little bit crazy to me still. It's a little odd to work for a company that I'm an enormous fan of. So there's a lot of responsibility and respect and passion and interest, and just constantly pinching myself. But cool. I very much love being there. So
that was great. And as you said, it's just that drive to just go after it, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you really need that. You need to find something you're passionate about, because everybody knows you can't learn something to the extent that you need to be a professional, especially a world leader in something, unless you are absolutely passionate about it. Yeah. I hate modeling, right? Like, I really can't stand modeling. I love looking at models. I love beautifully modeled environments, but it's not something that drives me. And yeah. I found it really difficult to learn to model because I wasn't that interested in it. So yeah. To come home and sit down and think, oh, I'm going to spend 3 hours modeling now. God, it drove me nuts. So but I knew that I wanted to light, and I had this kind of, I felt like I had a roadblock for a while, that I wanted to be a lighting artist, but I couldn't model. So how could I model these scenes and texture them and do all of this immense work leading up to where I got to light the scene and showcase my lighting?
Yeah, no, dude, it's a testament, as Anna is saying, living the dream. So
yeah.
All right. So speaking about lighting, since
yeah.
that's what we're here for.
Uh-huh.
Could you give us a little bit of just of a walkthrough in terms of your process and how you work and how you light at, let's say a place like Naughty Dog? Like, what's your process?
For sure. I mean, it's a little difficult to describe succinctly. I mean, lighting is a very organic process. It's some parts of what we do is very procedural, right? You can give someone a list of things to do and they'll tick off the list. And step 1, add a sky dome and set it to this intensity. Step 2, add a sun, set it to this intensity. And there is a little of that, and that bleeds into a very organic, experimental, playful state of mind where you're trying things, you're dropping lights in, you're hitting render, you're seeing what happens. But Generally, a scene depends on the level at Naughty Dog. Different companies work differently, but so for example, the prison which you're looking at right now, a lot of this I had no concept for, so I had a lot of liberty to go into the scenes and say, okay, how do I want to light this? I kind of know the mood of the space. I know that it's this hot, sunny Panamanian kind of prison. It needed to feel a certain way, so I knew that going in. So I'd find some reference photography or even some concept art or anything online that kind of captured that feeling, and I'd look for what made that scene feel that way. And the first step from that is to get your sun and dome, which doesn't sound very exciting. It sounds a little boring, just that step, but that is one of the most critical, is to drop your sky in and pick a sky and make sure the sky works well, especially with something like Uncharted, which is a little pulpy and colorful and action movie. So skies are really important because they help set the mood. It's not just a time of day thing. It's about the mood of the space you're in. So look for a sky dome that works, which would later be painted into a complete sky. So we often have choice over that. Sometimes the art director will step in and say, I want you to use this specific look. I want you to use this specific sky. I want you to use this specific time of day. But for most of my levels, it was more or less on me. So I would drop in a sky, drop in a sun, and then spend a few days just moving the sun around, moving through the level, and looking for what looked good and felt good. And there's a lot of trusting your gut in that at that step. I think that's where lighting kind of bridges science, technology, and art. So you need to understand the science of light to understand what looks good and why it looks good and why it feels realistic to the human eye. If you don't understand the science, then you're going to make those kind of mistakes where you're looking at the scene, you're going, this doesn't look very real, and I can't really tell why. There's a technology, you've got all of these tools, and they all have limitations because we're simulating and emulating. We're not actually producing real photorealism. We're using a bunch of tools which have many options, many switches and dials and cheats and hacks that we can do to try and get a result. But it's not a case of just clicking the make photorealistic button or make moody button or whatever else. So we need to be prepared to spend a lot of time kind of moving from the sun and sky and getting that stuff in and getting a fairly realistic base that feels good to moving through the level. For example, this one here, I'll just pause it on this shot. So this had to feel a specific way. We wanted this moment where you come up out of the solitary and you walk into the sunlight and it feels very blinding and overwhelming, which meant that I had to push the exposure a lot on the outside, which meant it created all of this extra contrast, which each choice introduced some problems that had to be solved. So if you're looking at this concrete walkway, there's quite a lot of natural light spilling into this space, and the bake did not have that with the sun and dome. So I ended up putting a directional light that's more or less like a very soft sun pointing down at the ground, and I disabled the direct component on that light. So all of this extra indirect light is bouncing up into this space coming from that one directional light. So there'll be a lot of those kinds of choices where you need to experiment and hack and play around and see what works, and lots and lots of area lights, spotlights, extra fill lights. It's kind of like, in a way, lighting cinema. I mean, when you light a shot for film, you have this wonderful advantage that the camera is locked and no one can see what's behind the camera. But if you've ever looked at stage lighting or set lighting for a TV episode or for a feature film, there's always like 10s, 20, 30, 100 extra lights, like there's lights everywhere and they're all shining in to get this very specific look. And when the player is in control of the frame, that creates a really difficult challenge for us, because if I can't just put a light behind the camera shining in a specific direction to get a look, because if the player turns the camera, that breaks. So there's a lot of experimentation and iteration on that, on getting the look you want and then making that look feel natural. So pushing extra light in through a window, but then making sure that when the player walks outside, there isn't some weird big extra glow on the outside of the window, stuff like that. So from there, once we've got kind of a base lighting pass, which is everything starts to feel fairly realistic and nice to look at, we do an artistic pass, which is you'll go through and focus on details. You'll come around a corner and there's a chair in the corner of the room and you think, what, I kind of would like if this chair was a little bit of a focal point. So you'll add an extra light just to kick that chair a little, or some lights to highlight specific characters, or especially gameplay. You'll go through and have a look. If I go to, I think it's the next frame. So this one, these tunnels, they're in the base bake, there just wasn't much light getting into these halls, and the light that's you see kind of hitting the walls, that's totally faked. I mean, there's extra lights put in to make it look this way for a reason, to kind of shape this. And the room at the end of the hallway, I put lights in there because it felt nice compositionally to have this focal point in the dark, so moving between spaces of light and dark. And then you have these characters beating up some guy on the right, and originally they weren't standing out too well, so I added extra runtime lights, so they're hitting just those characters. So as you walk into the space, those characters highlight and pop, and you can see that they're being really brutal and beating this poor guy up. So you start to do these gameplay kind of beats and move through the level over and over and over again, and look for things that feel really good and emphasize those things, and look for bits that feel a bit off. So you might maybe look down this hallway and think, the foreground and the midground are very flat right now. And this is true. Looking at this space, I would say, maybe I could have pulled a little of the foreground out and left that central light there, the dominant light, rather than kind of keeping them fairly balanced. It might have been a better composition. So if I was still working on this level, I would try that and see what the result was, and trust my gut on whether it felt better, and kind of move from there. So the key gameplay concerns were navigation, making sure the player can always navigate, which is super challenging, especially on dark interiors, because you want to sell that it's dark and gloomy, but you don't want the player to get lost. And we have these issues where everybody's playing on a different television, right? And some TVs will crunch the blacks really bad. So if I want something to feel nice and moody and dark, I push it dark, but then I need to test it on a bunch of TVs, and I might find, on this television it's so dark the player can't navigate, so I need to lift, and then suddenly I lose that contrast. So how do I get the contrast back? And again, it's still that same iteration of tweaking and attempting to kind of get that result. And from that point, sorry, I'm yammering on really fast here, slow me down if I'm talking too fast. But from that point,
I think you're good.
Excellent. So from that point, we will, I'm just going to check the next slide. Yeah, so from that point, this is a good example, I think, of like the artistic pass. If most of the light in this space is completely faked, so those tiny windows that exist in the walls there don't cast anywhere near this much light into this room. So the artistic pass was, I think there's maybe 12 area lights in this room, area lights and spotlights, kind of casting extra light up on the walls and making some surfaces warm and some cool, so all the forms read, so that you feel like you can clearly read the archways and the stairs and the walls and the ceiling and the tunnels and so on. From that point, we go into kind of a post process where, so at Naughty Dog, the lighting artists are responsible for a lot of the post work using a render setting system, so we can control exposure, which is critical. You need to make sure that your exposure always feels quite natural and doesn't yo-yo too much. You don't want it to bounce around as the player turns their head and suddenly it gets dark because there's a bright spot on the wall. There's a lot of fine tuning to get that to feel nice. We'll dial in fog so that you can start to read distance well, and lots and lots of other settings that might tweak your tonal range, or your tint, or the way that colors read, or there are seriously hundreds of these settings. And the final step generally is to do a LUT, a color lookup table. So we grade the final image, which will give you kind of different results, so you can make something feel warmer or cooler or more contrasty or less contrasty, or kind of balance the overall lighting in a different way. And while I explain all of that in a linear process, starting with concept, then figuring out your time of day and your sky and your sun direction, then making sure the game plays well and the player can see what they're doing, then doing your art pass, and then doing your LUT, your render settings and your LUT at the end. The reality is that entire process is like spaghetti. So you'll do a pass, and then I might jump in and do the LUT second because I have this idea that I really want to try, and then I'll start on the render settings, then I'll go back to the first pass again and move the sun. Then I'll start doing an art pass on one specific area because it feels quite nice. Then I'll notice I need to move the sun direction again. And so it's very organic, very fluid, constantly iterating and looking for the best possible result, I guess.
Cool. No, and it's I mean, obviously the process works extremely well because just kind of looking at some of the images, it's a testament to this, the quality of the art you're able to produce from all of those. So,
Well,
um,
it has to be said that Naughty Dog has some of the best environment modelers and textures I've ever seen. These guys are amazing, and they make my lighting work so much easier. It has been a joy to light these scenes. So
it's great, you know, crap in, crap out, right? It's
yeah,
like
that's
when
right.
you have
Yep.
amazing stuff, when you have an amazing canvas, it's it makes your job that much more enjoyable, you
No
know.
one wants to polish a turd.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody, nobody. So all right, great. So we have tons of questions that you know we're gonna try to get through as much as we can, and we're gonna take a couple based on you know some of the stuff that you were covering initially.
Awesome.
So uh, um, Cassidy is asking how many of these renders are in engine?
Every single one of them.
All of them.
All real time in engine. None of these are cheated at all. This is literally just screen grabbed from the game.
Wow, amazing. Now they look that much better.
Yeah,
um,
our technicians do some magic, I tell you.
oh man, it's great stuff. SM wants to know where do you get the sky domes from? Is there an existing library at the studio, or do you create them from scratch?
We have an existing library of skies that people have photographed in Naughty Dog. I might photograph a sky. I might paint one. You know, sometimes I have a vague idea of the feel I want. I'm not an illustrator, by the way. I'm not going to paint a nice sky, but a sky dome is such a diffuse light source that a really rough version of it tends to work pretty well. In fact, sometimes the rough painted sky dome I use ends up making it into a final game, and the concept artist or the artist responsible for painting the sky for that level will roughly match it, and it just feels right. So, for example, the epilogue, actually for the epilogue, I just used a clear blue sky to bake with. It was, even though there's clouds in the sky, I used a blue sky with no gradient because it felt better to me. So again, that's
Cool.
about trusting your gut.
Definitely. Claudia wants to know the fidelity in Uncharted 4 is really amazing. Do you have specific process to keep on track, or is it guaranteed by the in-house tool?
Oh, this is just hard work. I mean, everybody there, everybody at Naughty Dog is super passionate and has the thrill of being able to take some ownership. I mean, I think there's been talks before about how our studio runs a little differently to what I'm used to. There's not really, I mean, there's an art director and there's a creative director, and these people will sometimes have really clear ideas that they communicate. But often too, I'll put my hand up and I'll take a level because I like the idea of that level. No one's assigning it to me. I get it, and I have to make some creative choices, and I'm trusted to make those choices, and that's wonderful. It's a lot of responsibility, and it's terrifying sometimes. Especially, I say that there's this process as an artist that I believe is true for most of us. And I think I've told you this one before, Manny, but there's like 6 steps, and I read this
Oh
online
yeah,
once. And
I love this one.
step 1 is this is awesome. Step 2 is this is tricky. Step 3, this is shit. Step 4, I am shit. Step 5, this might be okay. Step 6, this is awesome. Now I go through that with every single level. I go in with an idea. I start aiming for it. It all goes wrong. I start trying to solve it. I start figuring out what works, and then just trust in your gut as an artist that you are going to find it. Keep looking for it, and it will be there somewhere. So
Yeah, I completely agree.
yeah,
It's like whether it's lighting, modeling, animation. I think that's just a part of the process.
that's
It's a
right.
part of
So
the
so
journey.
so we have some wonderful tools, and we have some amazing tool developers, and they're all developing things constantly to help our workflow and to help us work faster, because it's all about iteration, right? Like, you need to be able to iterate really quickly, create something, get it in, because everybody's working on dependencies. So as a lighting artist, I kind of want them some decent representations of the models and materials in as quickly as possible so I can start lighting. So we all iterate, but everything in the scene is pretty much hand placed. I mean, this is all deliberate choices. There's nothing here that's automated.
Yeah,
So
phenomenal stuff.
I think that's why we get the results we get. So I like that a lot.
Cool. Brandon wants to know, how has the move to BPR affected your job as a lighter?
Ah, that's a great one. So in some ways, it's made it easier. In some ways, it's made it harder. So in some of my earlier work, I worked with RenderMan. I worked with Mental Ray. I worked with some renderers that did have some decent PBR workflows, not real-time stuff, but offline renders. But they also, there was a lot of cheating, and there was a lot of hacking, and there was a lot of I want to bounce from a particular light, so I'd put an area light in, and I'd actually fake the bounce using an area light. And the thing is, when we move to PBR, we don't really give that up. We just get closer to a realistic result faster. So just adding a sun and sky in some levels almost looks final. I mean, you can get something really, really nice out of that. But I mean, we aren't satisfied with that. We want to move in, and we want to start breaking those rules. And so there are times when we break PBR. I mean, I know in some levels the reflections in puddles weren't bright enough, so I boosted the sky quite a lot. And when I caught the cube maps, when I did the cube map capture, so it's a process whereby we capture all the cube maps for a level and generate them, and the reflections start working. When I do that, sometimes I really cheat it. I push the sky really bright so that the sky reflects brighter than it would in reality, but it just looks nicer. And again, that comes back to trusting your gut. But the goal is to kind of stick to a PBR workflow as much as possible, because it also creates consistency in your look. You don't want to break it too much. Just break it when you really need to, I guess.
Cool. Eric Dew is asking, I'm a senior lighter as well, trying to push that final 10 to 15% in our game. Color grading and the use of LUTs have been neglected in our pipeline. I've had no production experience in this area. What kind of tools and workflow do you use to achieve that final 10 to 15%?
Okay. Yeah, this is huge. Being able to do a color grade is all the difference in the world. I don't have it handy, but I do have, let me get to this shot. So I have this shot somewhere as a GIF or GIF. Don't kill me either way I say it. I'm going to say GIF because it's graphics, just saying.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the same thing.
Yeah, I have a GIF that has this shot, this with just sun and dome, then with the artistic pass, then with the color grade, and there's a huge difference between the pre-color grade and post-color grade. I mean, that's really what takes it the final kind of more or less photorealistic look. Whereas some levels, like say this one, look almost exactly the same pre and post LUT. So it kind of depends, but that LUT, having that LUT as an option is really, really important. As to the workflow that we use for that, behind the scenes, I am not too sure. I know Waylon Brink, one of our amazing technical artists, developed a system for us to do HDR LUTs. So we can color grade values above 1, which allows us to tone map ultra bright values beyond 1 into a 0 to 1 range, which was kind of critical to getting the look in the interiors here, and absolutely critical for this look in the epilogue level. He did do a talk on that, so you might be able to find that online. Maybe I can send Manny the link and he can forward that on. But he talks about that a little. As for our workflow as an artist, I take a screenshot of the level in linear color space. I bring it into a compositing package like Fusion or Nuke or even Photoshop. I grade the image using the tools in that software package, and I export the LUT from that, and in game it just works. It's for the artist, it's a really, really simple and organic workflow, and I like it a lot because I can get in there and use the color curves to push. I can punch the saturation of the greens, or crunch the shadows a little, or soften the highlights, or kind of do anything I want as a final step. And as you would know, doing that in render is really expensive. I mean, you need to adjust all your lights and send off another bake. And on some of these levels, the bakes take 8, 12 hours for a result. But being able to do it in a LUT and get your results instantaneously is really nice. So our tools allow us to change the LUT and have it live update in game, which is
cool.
Just wonderful. I love it.
Perfect. And this is something that I want to touch upon. This is something that you and I spoke about yesterday after seeing some of your work and what you submitted to Naughty Dog. So I definitely want to take, I would love for you to take a few minutes, to kind of showcase that. But the question is from Allie, how would you suggest going about building a portfolio when you can't model or texture?
Oh, wonderful
So,
question.
so
I
Boone,
love this question.
Boone, I know
Okay.
we couldn't write this. This is perfect. So
All right. So
let's get into
I'm
it.
about to show you the reel I got into Naughty Dog on. I You may be shocked. I am shocked sometimes. It's probably not what you're anticipating. But let me just get into my browser here. So this is the work. You can see this, Manny? Is this coming through fine?
Yep, I can see it
Okay.
perfectly fine. Could everybody else see it? It's Boone's website. Can you guys see it? I know sometimes when you switch over, it acts up.
Yeah.
Just get
Okay.
a simple yes from one person. Yep, we're good.
Okay, we're good.
Now
So
everybody is typing it.
okay, so this is my lighting folio. So I mentioned before I really don't enjoy modeling much. I'm not particularly good at it. So it didn't I still set out to do lighting, and I looked for scenes, often finding photographs that I like, and I'd take something from the photograph and I'd reproduce it. But I look for things that are simple and quick for me to model, simple and quick to texture, because they're things I don't particularly. I enjoy texturing a bit, but I don't love it. And just get straight to the lighting. So yes, Naughty Dog hired me on this. They also had a test, which I should emphasize is really important, because the test is critical to getting into the interview and stuff. But these scenes, you can see like these columns, they're just more or less cylinders. I put a displacement map on them. I found some photos online and photo bashed them really quickly. These rocks are just black gloss. There is no texture on them at all. And it's the same rock, just copied and pasted over and over. There's a slight noise. I think I used a photo of clouds to create some noise on the water, so it gave that sense that the water was slightly in motion. I mean, this sci-fi hallway, who hasn't done a sci-fi hallway? Everybody should do a sci-fi hallway. It's just the same basic. I modeled a couple of panels and I copied and pasted them. Again, it was like spend as little time doing the stuff you don't like as possible so that you can get to the bits you do. So this one is cubes, right? I mean, these are literally cubes with a slightly beveled edge, and I threw a concrete texture on it, tiles. The grass was a little bit more complex. I mean, but again, I was looking for quick ways to do this stuff. I had an idea in my head, so I created some paint effects grass in Maya, converted it to polys, and used a scatter plugin to scatter it all over the place randomly. That was it. There's no attention to detail in that. I just let it be whatever it is, and I focus on the lighting. Some experimental stuff. Sometimes stuff pops into my head. I listen to a lot of retro wave, like Laserhawk and stuff like that, so I get all nerdy about that. I again see even the lighting in this is not particularly good. The grade isn't good, but it was an experiment, and I kind of liked the graphic quality of it. So I posted this one to my folio. So I have lots and lots of these, and not all of them are successful, but I learned something from every single one of them, and that's critical. I mean, but there is not a single one of these where the modeling is complicated. It's done very quickly. I mean, this is literally spheres with a noise displacement. You can see there's two spheres there that are kind of overlapping each other. Some more pattern stuff. I think this one's my favorite.
Another beautiful one.
I wish I had the scene handy to show you, but this is a textured sphere with a bunch of little spheres randomly placed inside it so they look like bubbles, and some floorboards with a slight dip in the wood. So focusing on that, on getting some of the detail in there, but most of it's texture and lighting and heavy depth of field.
And I'm sorry, Boone, could you pause on that for a sec? I think,
yeah, for sure.
And this is something that I forgot to mention yesterday. It's like, yes, if you had a very elaborate scene, right? It's like with these crazy textures and everything and all this detail, it's like, yes, it's like, you would do a great job with it. But I think one of the things though that's really effective about something so simple as the scene is it really allows you to just focus on the lighting, right?
Absolutely.
You're not focusing on a crazy ZBrush detail, in the character, it's like, or all the elements in the scene and all the different type of materials and like, the different type of shaders or whatever. it's like you're really forced to just focus on the simplicity of it. And in this case, it's all lighting.
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
all lighting. So
I
I
mean,
think there
there's a
is
little bit
something
of
to be said
material
about that.
work,
Yeah,
because lighting and materials interact
go
with
hand
each
in
other
hand.
so
Yeah.
much. But yeah, I mean, so my real, this is, I think I mentioned to you before, like an illustrator will take a sketchbook out at lunch and they'll sit there and they'll sketch people walking past. This is a lighting artist's version of that. You find these really simple scenes and they're experimental, and you reproduce the scene and get the most pure thing you can out of it, which is try to sell a look with light alone as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, if you've got these big, complicated environments, they're unwieldy and they're difficult to handle. If you've ever had to light map unwrap a scene like that, and I have, you're looking at weeks of just doing that, just before you can even start lighting. So focus on the things that just let you light quickly, like this hallway. There's
Beautiful.
so so again, attention to detail is pretty important. So in this hallway, the walls are all just a simple shader, but I chipped a little bit of kind of paint off the corners, and this stuff helps a lot. So if you're working on a folio and you want to create these simple spaces, adding these little details really sells suddenly that it's photorealistic. And I think my favorite personal one might be this one. uh, this took me maybe I think less than 10 minutes to model. Seriously, I just threw some cubes in. I had an idea for an image. I think I might have seen a photograph that was similar. I'm like, okay, I'm going to reproduce that. I really like that. And it was there's a sun in there. There's no sky dome. I used some area lights to kind of really get the composition I wanted out of it. Convert it to black and white. Voila, it looks better already because it's black and white. Pro tip, cool cheat, go for that. But yeah, this is the kind of stuff that I play with a lot. So yes, this got me hired by Naughty Dog. This and my test. So
No, beautiful stuff. And as I said, it's just a testament to, really focusing on your craft, as you said, so,
yeah, please
um,
don't let a lack of complicated environments stop you,
yeah,
because really
yeah,
that's your lighting should be able to sell itself. There's something about lighting which I love, and that's that you can light a white cube in a white box and make it look so pretty you'll want to print it and hang it on your wall. But you can also light the most complicated, detailed, beautiful environment and make it look like turd.
yeah,
So I mean, there's a lot of power in lighting and there's a lot of responsibility. Please don't let the lack of really complicated environments stop you from becoming a lighting artist.
cool. No, great one. So, Ali, thanks for that question, because it was a great segue into something that, really I wanted everybody to see, because as I said, it was a true testament to just the quality, and just not just the quality, but just the quality of just your artwork, right? And your understanding of lighting. Because I get asked by students all the time, hey, it's like, I want to focus on lighting, but I don't have an amazing, scene to light, and in this
Well,
case,
I think the reality is you're going to suck at it like 100, 1,000 times before you're good, right? So
yeah,
get those 100 or 1,000 really shitty versions of your art out of the way as quickly as possible, so you can start being good at it. Don't
yeah,
don't take forever modeling an environment, because it's going to take you 40 years to get through the 100 to 1,000 shitty versions of it.
exactly. Completely agree. So, what work, Alexi, wants to know, what workstation are you using for lighting? Do you have any of the specs for the workstation at work, or?
I don't, unfortunately. I mean, I don't think it's anything particularly amazing. It's a consumer level PC as far as I know. Uh, yeah, I mean, I do this stuff at home as well on a $500 PC. So,
Yeah, cool. Roman wants to know, do you have any advice about how to tackle exposure?
oh, okay, that's an interesting one. So, we all approach it differently. Exposure is really important because light values are more or less arbitrary, right? Like if your sun is 10 or if your sun is 10,000, it doesn't really matter. It Your exposure will kind of push into the range that it needs to go. I tend to approach that a cloudy sky is exposure 0. So that's a good place for me to start, so that I don't get too far. I kind of have a common dialogue then between all of my levels. I know that every level I can look at this level and say, okay, well, this is a sunny day that you're looking at right now. So my exposure point is probably -3, -4, something like that. Like I'm exposing down a little because it's a bright sunny day. Our software uses a kind of dynamic iris, so it looks for bright points in the scene and it looks for dark points and it figures out. I don't know how this works, by the way. I'm just kind of winging this. I don't know how it works in the code, but I know that I can choose an exposure point. I can choose an exposure range, so I can say the camera can go down to -2 and up to +1, but it can't kind of deviate outside that range. And we'll set up regions throughout a level to change that. So in the prison, which you're looking at right now, this was a challenging level for this because it had some parts that were exposed down to -4 and some parts that were up to +6. So you're talking about 10 stops of exposure. So in the interiors, I would have separate render settings that clamped those exposure ranges so it wouldn't yo-yo too much. It wouldn't go too high or too low. And then we'd like do some scripting so that as you walked through a doorway, it would slowly kind of blend up to a different exposure or down to a different exposure. So there's definitely a lot of work on that. It's not something you casually dial in and then ignore.
Cool. JJ, Unreal 4 has capsule shadows for indirect casting. Looking at the prison scene, it looks like you still get nice soft shadows inside the indirect illuminated areas. Do you use cheats to get effects that are limited by real time, or can you achieve more natural lighting through post processes?
I'm sorry, I can't really answer that question with a great deal of detail. I know that that Naughty Dog developed some capsule. I don't even know what we call it, but some shadowing technology for The Last of Us, I believe. And it was when what you're talking about, when you walk up against a wall and that wall is only indirectly lit, you still get a sense of contact shadow from the character. We still use that same technology, and it does create really nice results. So as the player is walking through an environment, you will get these soft, subtle kind of shadows that give you the sense that this baked indirect light is actually dynamic. I have no idea how that is implemented.
Cool. Not a worries. How has technology changed your process? More freedom? JJ wants to know.
More iteration time. Early on, when I was working on Animalia, which is not a particularly technically impressive feat, it looks like an old school CGI animated TV series, which is exactly what it is. A render could take days. So being able to tweak your rim light and your sun direction and all this kind of stuff with technology that allows me to turn a bake around in 20 minutes, that's the big thing. I mean, it's really cool that the technology got better and I could get better results faster and the shaders look better and all of this kind of stuff. But mostly when I'm thinking in terms of as an artist who wants to add 20 lights to a scene and move them around and make things look pretty, it's the ability to do that as quickly as possible. And it's something we focus on at work a lot. We constantly develop new tools and new workflows and improve the technology in a way that allows us to rapidly iterate. We can iterate faster. And I think that's the most critical thing, is being able to make changes, because none of us land on a successful result right away. I wish I could show you what my first pass lighting looks like on most of these levels. No, I don't. Actually, there's no way I'd show anybody. I'd die of shame. Yeah.
So Brandon wants to know, as a lighter, are you in charge of screen effects like AO, clutter, etc., or do you work closely with effects artists that manage fog that affect lighting as well? And that wasn't clutter; it was just CLUT, clut.
Okay. Yes and yes. I mean, I do have control over pretty much everything about the final look and of the scene. So that does include quite a lot of effects type stuff. But yes, we also work collaboratively. So I have a control over, say, universal fog on the scene, but then I might talk to one of the FX artists and say, hey, it'd be really cool if we had this drifting fog on the ground here, which the FX artist might say, yeah, I agree. And they'll create it and we'll test it and we'll iterate and we go backwards and forwards. It's very, very collaborative. And vice versa. I mean, someone will come to me and say, hey, I really like this lighting in this space, but what if you move this light over here and we put this kind of effect here instead? And we do that. We try that. So.
No, that's great. Um, so Basim Morcos, and I'm sorry for butchering your name, Basim. As a lighting artist at Naughty Dog, are you responsible for creating the UV map for light maps? Obviously, I know you answered that before, but if you could go in a little bit of detail.
Oh my God, thank God, no. I Light map unwrapping is the worst. I apologize to everybody who has to do it. I had to do it for my test. It's it's not a fun process. I guess it can be a little bit cathartic in the sense that you just zone out for 18 hours moving UVs around. But we have tools that auto unwrap some things, but our unfortunately our background artists, the poor folks, have to do light map unwraps of a lot of stuff. So
Cool.
that doesn't fall on us. Thank God.
Okay. Okay.
I'm smiling from ear to ear. I feel a little bit evil with this grin on my face, but seriously, I'm glad we don't have to do that.
um, do you write much HLSL shader code yourself?
None. I
Okay.
definitely want to. I want to learn it. I think this is, as a lighting artist, or probably as any role in the industry, skilling up in other areas is really useful. So, for example, I taught myself programming. Took me quite a while because I'm not super technical, and I'd come home and I'd spend 2 hours a night staring at code to try and learn what the hell it was saying and wait for those plateau moments where suddenly something clicks. But learning that was absolutely worth it because now I can go to work and there's something that I'm doing that's a laborious process. And I think, you know what, I can write a script to do this. I can write a small program that automates this. And then I've improved the workflow for me and improved the workflow for the team. In the same way, if you want to learn HLSL as a lighting artist, I think that's amazing. I think that's a really powerful thing to know because you're going to know how you're using the tools to create art, but you're also going to have some skills that allow you to adjust the techniques that art is rendered. So you might, so for me, if I have an idea, for example, I might think, you know what, I think our reflections could look better if they did this. Then that process is slowed a little for me because I need to go find someone who also agrees with my idea and is willing to take the time to test it and see. And again, I mean, tests like that fail more often than they succeed, but we always try this kind of stuff. But if I could do that myself, jump in and write some HLSL code and test it and see if it how it worked out, I think that'd be amazing. So it's definitely something I want to learn.
Cool. Um, Carl wants to know: are you hand? Okay, nope, that's the exact same question. So I guess that was answered. Bojan, did you use V-Ray or similar render for your portfolio work, or was it Unreal or Unity?
Okay, so my portfolio stuff is all offline rendered. So it's all V-Ray, Mental Ray, uh, a little bit of RenderMan, some Maya software. It's kind of whatever works. Learning the process is more important than the renderer. So I'm a fan of V-Ray because V-Ray allows me to get very quick, decent results. So I can kind of get to the, depending on the scene. So like a nice exterior, I can get 80% of the way in V-Ray really quickly. But ultimately, I'm an artist, not a technician. So I'm going to look at that scene. I'm going to want to get in and, tweak those values and move some lights around and add some extra lights to kick certain parts of the scene. And that works regardless of your renderer. I even recommend you try to light scenes. So take a photograph, a simple photograph, produce a simple model of it, and try to light it the same way in Maya software. Use area lights to fake bounce light. This kind of stuff I think is really useful because it never goes away. I'm still using those same techniques even now in this room that you're looking at right now and these interiors. There are a lot of area lights in there that just fake extra fill or extra bounce or kind of kick certain parts of the scene, and all of that comes from, I think, well, my skills with that come from back in the day having to render with renderers that didn't do this stuff automatically. So that's a skill set that's worth learning.
Cool. And Justina wants to know: how often do you go back and forth between people in different departments? You said polishing a turd. Did you ever have to tell someone to change anything because the light wasn't working well with the scene?
Oh, geez. I mean, I hate that phrase being applied to what to what I'm talking about now, because that implies that anyone I've worked with at Naughty Dog has ever produced a turd. That's just not the case. But there's definitely a lot of back and forth. I mean, so Christian the Cotter is the amazing environment artist responsible for these interiors, and uh, I mean, there's his. I got great results from his stuff straight away, but we kind of we're super nitpicky, you know. So we'll go in and I will say to him, you know what, the green on the walls is like 3% too saturated, I think anyway. What do you think? And he might say, oh no, you're completely wrong, or he might say, you know what, let's try it and see how it looks, and we'll try it. And it's very collaborative. We all work together. It's very important not to be precious. You've got to accept that you're producing something that is a team effort, and uh, knowing when to trust your own gut and when to step back a bit and say, you know what, I'm going to try that, or I think you're right, let's give it a go, is really important. But yeah, there's so I've never had to polish a turd at Naughty Dog. God, I'm going to regret saying that. Someone at work's going to jump on me for that. But there's definitely back and forth, and not just me going to somebody and saying, hey, can you tweak these materials, I think they'll work better with the lighting. But there's people coming to me and saying, hey, the lighting's too bright here, it's too dark here, I want to be able to see this, my material isn't showing any spec, how do I fix the spec on this, or how do you fix it? And I'll go, yeah, no worries, I'll jump in and see what I can do with that. So I might do something like, add some, and it goes back to a question about PBR and keeping as realistic as possible. So something that I'm a huge fan of is adding specular only runtime lights. So I'll add a point light, it doesn't cast any shadows, it just emits specular. And I might put it in a hallway or put it in a dark area so that the surfaces appear slightly more specular. They have some more reflectivity to them. And that's where the art process steps in on top of the PBR type stuff. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of collaboration.
Cool. What do you think are the most important skills for a 3D lighting artist? Orkan wants to know.
To be able to light well, sorry, that was a cheeky response, but I mean, I would say that you need to be able to bridge the science, the technology, and the art. So you're going to want to know the science of light. Jeremy Vickery has done some training. He's a ex-Pixar guy. He now works at Naughty Dog. He's done
amazing.
Yeah, he's done some great lighting
great
training on the science of light, and that's really good. I'll also be covering this in my course. So it's critical to understand how light moves through a scene and how it reacts with materials, and the difference between diffuse and indirect and specular and roughness and all of these things. The second step is the technology, understanding how the technology emulates these things, because you want to know how you can improve that when you need to, how you can cheat it, how you can break the rules, and the limitations. So you might want to create a scene that has this very specific look, but the technology doesn't quite do that right. So how do you go about using the tools that you have at your disposal to produce that result? And the last one is the art. So you need to watch a lot of films, follow a lot of photographers, look at their stuff, take screen grabs from a film, model that scene in the most simple way, and try to reproduce the light. I think it all just comes from that. I wish I could give you a basic checklist of stuff that you could focus on. Oh, also learn some scripting. I think scripting is useful for every single department. So I would say learn some Python scripting. That's going to help a lot. But otherwise, just get in there and start lighting stuff and challenging yourself and making lots and lots of mistakes, because when you make mistakes, you learn lots of cool stuff.
Cool. And I think that answers Jeff's question, which is you mentioned the science of light. Could you go into more detail on how you can learn more about that and develop an eye for what looks real and not? So you answered that question as well.
Yeah.
So perfect. So SM wants to know, do you handle, and I think you've mentioned that a little bit, but do you handle the shaders as well as the lights, or is that mainly on the environment artists?
I rarely touch the shaders, though sometimes I can jump in. So it depends. I mean, no one wants to step into somebody else's domain and do their work. I definitely have input on the materials and how they respond to light. Maybe some might be too dark for the look we're going for, some might be too light, or stuff like that. But from time to time, I'll jump in, especially if it's like emissive surfaces. There's a light bulb on the wall and it's emitting a glow, and I'll just edit the material because it's quicker for me to do it than to go to the artist. And also, they're not going to mind if I do that. But often, so I'll go into a scene with a very clear view of what I want from the scene, but so is the environment artist. So I don't want to take that from them. So that's why we collaborate so much. But if you are in control of the lighting and the materials, you can have a lot of power, but it's a lot to learn as well. These are two entirely different fields that are super, super correlated.
Cool. Sarah wanted to know how long were you given to complete the test?
As long as I needed. That's I wish I could give you a better answer, but the test for me was as long as I needed. I'm not sure what the test rules are now. It's been 2 years since I did the test, and I think they update them fairly frequently. But yeah, I took as long as I needed, and I took as long as I needed.
Cool. Okay, Carl has a question. Are you hand UVing light maps? I know. Nope, we already answered that.
No, we're not doing that yet.
Yep, we already answered that. JJ, did you have any prior game experience before applying at Naughty Dog? It seems like every game gig wants AAA experience before applying. You're
okay. I
didn't have much.
No, I can talk about that. I mean, I worked at Chrome, which was an independent studio, and that was quite a while ago. And then I worked on a couple of projects there. But I mean, to be honest,
AAA, though.
No, nothing AAA. I mean, I loved Chrome as a studio, but they weren't a big AAA producer. And the last thing I worked on before I applied at Naughty Dog was an iOS game, a Fruit Ninja educational game for 5-year-olds. So, I mean, the reality is, can I tell a story about my interview? I think that might.
Oh, I think if it's a story I think you mentioned, please do.
Okay, so something I think is really critical, and maybe not every studio works this way. Maybe every studio is going to come at you and want a big list of credits. But I got to the interview with Naughty Dog, and I wasn't really sure why they'd brought me over, to be honest. But I got a free flight to LA, my first time out of Australia, so that was really cool. So I went into the interview, and they kind of took a look at my work, and they asked me a bunch of questions, and I felt profoundly insecure. I was like, what the hell am I doing here? You are Naughty Dog. This is the pinnacle, and I've barely scratched the surface in what I do. But they said they liked my work. They liked the look of my work, and they asked me a question and said, why did I want to work at Naughty Dog? And I started to answer one of those kind of, those canned answers, because you do the best video games in the world, and because your stories are so good, and because your art is so good. But it was inauthentic. So because there was a reason, and the reason was I am a big, hairy old gay man, and I played The Last of Us. And when you meet Bill, the first thing that popped into my head was, he's a daddy bear. This is a gay character, and I just knew it straight away. My gut told me that this was a gay character, and so I looked around his apartment, and I saw the gay porn mags piled up in his bookshelf, and I was so excited. I thought, holy crap, here's a gay character who isn't a creepy rapist, and isn't a punchline to a joke. He isn't a stereotype. He's just this interesting, kind of gruff, and ultimately really tragic character. And the way they handled his character was super sensitive, and I loved the story of him. And so here I am in the interview telling this story jet lagged, and I started bawling, like just completely crying at the table. I'm like, oh God, just tell me I'm not hired now. Like, I'm a complete mess. And one of the interviewers, I won't say his name, one of the significant interviewers just got up and left. So I was like, oh God, I've ruined this. I've destroyed it. But I heard that he walked out of the room and said, yep, hire him. I was hired, I think, because as I understand it, they kind of liked what I brought along. So I brought something different. I was just myself when I went in, which was the hardest thing in the world to do, because you kind of want to overthink it and you want to present yourself as this super successful thing. But I wasn't. I didn't have the experience. I was pretty confident I was an okay lighter, and I knew I would get better at Naughty Dog because I'd have no choice. I know my personality is to, I'm going to have to step up here. And it's true. I've done the best work I've ever done at Naughty Dog, and I can improve a lot more still. And that's the most fascinating and wonderful thing to me. But ultimately, I was hired because I came in passionate and all super interested, and I was just genuine about it. There was nothing fake about it. And I've heard stories of other people being hired there ahead of really, really experienced people because the people doing the interviewing really liked who they were. And I think that I believe that probably applies across the board more than you think it does. So when someone, my experience, I can't talk for Naughty Dog's hiring procedures, right? Like I really don't know. I can only talk anecdotally about my experience. But in my experience, when a company is advertising for someone with experience, they just want to know that you can do the job. And if you can prove that you can do good work, regardless of your experience level, there might be some question: can you work in a production environment? I mean, that's because production environments are very different than sitting at home and working on your own stuff, which is a fair concern. But after they make that decision, like, can you do the work? Can you fit in the team? Can you produce? The next question is, do we want to work with you? And part of that is like just being a nice, interesting, authentic human being who has something to offer, especially if you can bring who you are, because who you are is going to be very different to who everybody else is.
Cool. No, that's a great story. And obviously people really enjoy that story. Getting some comments on that now. But yeah, I remember the first time you told
I
that.
nearly started crying again. I get really emotional when I talk about it.
No, it's a powerful story, and it's definitely a testament, to just your passion, So and Naughty Dog obviously seems someone that was just genuine, passionate, and obviously a great artist. So
There is not enough that can be said about being authentic and passionate, right? Like
yeah,
just be who you are. You're going to bring something unique, and
exactly.
don't sweat what you can't control. You can't control that you don't have a lot of experience, so stop worrying about it. Just go and get better at what you do. You can't fix that by worrying about it, right? Just be
Yeah,
better. Like
exactly.
get better every day.
And speaking of that, it's someone was wanted to know, Yakov wanted to know, could you please cycle through the images from your audition again? And obviously he's referring to the images from your portfolio.
For sure, I'm happy to do that. Let's go
Definitely.
back there.
And as we're doing that, Mojana wants to know, how do you balance baked versus dynamic lighting? How many dynamic lights are used in the scene? And what do you use to, well, we already know there's no light maps. You're not
Okay, so how many dynamic lights do I use?
Yeah.
How long is a piece of string? It depends on the scene. So in some scenes, I will use.
I would say for this opportunity, let's switch back to for this particular question, and then we could go back to this. But let's switch back to your Uncharted work.
Yeah, let's have a look, because I might be able to use an example. So this scene has 0 runtime lights except for the sun. Okay, so this is all baked, and FYI, I'm a huge fan of baked lighting. I think baked lighting gives me so much control over the look. Yep, it has its limitations, right? Like, with games are getting more and more dynamic, and we're constantly facing that challenge of how to integrate dynamic elements with baked lighting. But it's something worth solving to me, because I really like the power and the fidelity that you get from baked lighting. But so there's a sun in this scene. Again, this scene is just the sunlight. This scene had about 20 runtime lights in it. So it has a fake sunlight shining through the window, casting some volumetric kind of crepuscular rays, I think they're called. What a weird name. It sounds like a disease. Crepuscular rays. There's lights just to cast some. So if you look at the globe, I'm going to freeze that. If you look at the globe on the right of the screen, there's a slight blue highlight on the center of that globe. Now, I think that's coming from, there's a point light, non-shadow casting spec point runtime light that's just picking up some reflections on surfaces. Again, I think this one is mostly just baked. I mean, we do some magic trickery sometimes so that we can bake the background. So the lights in the stairwell, the astute among you will notice that the pattern of the lighting on the walls does not match the sconce at all, but you know what, it looked good, so I left it there. And a lot of this will come down to your artistic choices. But so the light on the stairwell is hitting the walls, and it's baked to the walls, but there's a runtime light that affects the character only as they walk under that light. So it's not always super accurate, but it's about selling it. So what feels right and what feels good. And if you really look closely, sometimes you'll see the cracks where those things don't always line up, but no one cares about that stuff, right? They just want something that looks really nice and that they can say, wow, that's pretty. And oh, my character feels like they're integrated in the space. So this room, we use light probe data to light the characters with ambient light, and there was mostly ambient light hitting in this room, but I found when the character walked against the windows that they kind of lit a bit strange because of the way the ambient light was working on those probes. So what I did was the lights at the windows, there's some area lights in these windows pushing in some extra soft blue fill light into the room. I made them affect the background only, so they didn't affect any of the light probe data. And now I put runtime lights in the windows, spotlights that just affect the character. So as you get close to the windows, the character gets much better fidelity because runtime lights are going to give you really nice shadows and really nice specularity. But obviously they have a real performance cost. So we have to be careful about how many we use. Some scenes I can use 50 of the things because the scene is small and there's just not that much material density or not that much physics going on or whatever else has a cost to the scene. Some scenes are so expensive that I can't use any runtime lights at all. So, and that's going to come back to a lot of back and forth between all of the various departments to get it feeling right. The interior of this workshed, there's a runtime light at every single window. In some spaces I used, so if we go back to, I'm trying to find that one. So back to this, again, the background is baked, but there's also runtime lights hitting the background and the characters. So the character shadows don't go completely dark here, which I didn't mind the look of that. It felt like there was a little bit of diffuse light getting into the shadows. But I separated the volumetric from the key light. So you can see the volumetric lights coming down through those holes in the ceiling. There's 2 lights at each of those. It's 3, sorry. There's a spotlight that's emitting a key light only, so diffuse only light, which I controlled independently of another spotlight that was emitting the volumetrics, and I put a gobo on that to get a shape to the volumetric effect. And then there's a point light, which is emitting spec only. So I get specular on you can see the spec on the pipes on the wall and some spec in the floor. So by separating those out, I lose some physical accuracy, but I get more control. So I was able to tweak the spec to where I wanted it, the key to where I wanted it, and the volume to where I wanted it, all independently of each other.
Cool. And Roman just clarified that the what is it? The
crepuscular.
Yeah, crepuscular is actually it means dusk in Italian.
Oh, there you go. Okay,
yeah.
I did not know that. Thank you. I've just learned something as a lighting artist. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
So
okay, well that sounds way prettier now. I'm like,
no,
okay, that's a pretty word. It sounded like something that might grow on a plant or something. I wasn't too sure.
Exactly. Your plant is diseased with crepuscular or something. So
yes. So now it's a very pretty word. Thank you so much.
Exactly. So if we could still stay on those scenes.
Back on the Uncharted, yeah.
Yeah, we just wanted someone wanted to know how long does it take for you to light some of these scenes. I know it probably varies from scene to scene, but if you could give us a couple of benchmarks for how long it takes to light some of these scenes.
It took all of them 2 years. No, I mean, I worked on all of the scenes from start to finish, more or less. So I jump backwards and forwards between the scenes. It's hard to say exactly how long some took. Some definitely took more work than others. These levels, these came together fairly quickly. I was pretty happy with the results early on inside the tower here. The tunnel, I had 4 or 5 iterations on this before I started to settle on something. The exterior here was another quick one. The one I probably spent the 2 I spent the most time on were the townhome, which is a complicated interior. There's a lot of different lighting happening in here. There's it had to look a certain way too. I mean, the story here is that Drake he's kind of settled down from his adventures, and it's before he kicks off his new adventure. And we didn't want it to feel too cozy, right? Like he's supposed to feel like he's kind of craving his adventurous lifestyle again. But when I looked at this apartment, I'm like, I would kill to live in this house. So it was tricky to make it both warm, so up top, this is where all of his memories are. So this is the warmest place. This is the nicest place. This took the most work, was the attic. Getting this feeling just right. So it feels a little bit nostalgic. It feels a little bit dusty and cozy. Like I would go into this room and I'd sit down and I'd read a book because it feels really, really comfortable. But then moving down, I kind of went for a bit more harsher lighting and the shadows get a little bit darker. So it doesn't feel too welcoming. You know, this one took probably, I would say, it's hard to put a number down. I would say I'd spent probably about a quarter of my time on the entire game on this level, getting this one feeling right, because this felt really important. It was a very story based level. Half the game I spent on this. So this level, I went backwards and forwards to it forever. I just kept coming back to it, trying to get it to feel just right. There was something about it because this is it's the last scene you ever see in Uncharted. And as someone who'd never worked on a AAA game, and Uncharted is one of my hands down all time favorite series, and I just started at Naughty Dog, and I just moved to the US, and I'm living in LA, and I talk a weird accent no one understands, and they throw me this level. I'm like, holy crap! I better not fuck this one up. So I spent a lot of time on this, and my reasoning for this was, well, I knew it had to feel really inviting, so very sunny and kind of beachy and nice. So that was part of the vibe. But the other part was this felt like it was real to me. Like this is where Drake's life suddenly gets very real. He and happy and nice. You know, all these great adventures, very big pulpy action movie kind of adventures. And here he is in this wonderful, very real place with the people he loves. So that's why I kind of went for this photorealism. I really wanted it to really push the sense that this is where he lives now and this is his home and it's a wonderful, happy, welcoming place for him to be. So I spent half of my overall time on Uncharted 4 working on this level. And
Cool.
that was like tweaking down to the most minor detail. Crazy amount of focus on this one, which maybe, to be perfectly honest, please tune out anyone from work that's listening because I'm going to get fired for saying this, maybe to the detriment of other levels. I mean, there were other parts of the game that I could have spent more time on and they would look better because I'd spent more time on them. But ultimately, it's a transaction. What do I have X hours. I need to spend these hours somehow. How am I going to spend them? All right, well, this is a tunnel you walk through and you spend 30 seconds in this tunnel. It could look better, but you know what? This pinnacle moment needs to look amazing. So yeah. I'm going to get this stuff looking good, and I'll come back to it. But right now, I'm going to go spend that time.
Yeah, I think you made the right choice.
Cool, man.
So JJ wants to know: have you tried Redshift?
I have not. Sorry.
Okay. And SM wants to know: does the engine handles GI?
Do we have any runtime GI? No.
Yeah.
No, we have no runtime GI. All of our lighting is baked and using light probe data for foreground.
Okay. Carl wants to know to that question: are you doing your lighting setup in Maya rather than a proprietary editor?
Yes. Yep. All of my lighting is done in Maya.
Okay. Cool. And speaking of just time frame and how long a lot of these scenes took you, Eric D wants to know. What is the workload like at Naughty Dog for a lighter?
I mean, it varies. Sometimes it's pretty cruisy, and I have a lot of time to explore ideas in a scene, and sometimes something comes in pretty hot, and it's got to be lit and done. So, it's a creative studio. I don't think that this is. I think this is part of the energy of the place that makes it thrive, is that these things do kind of change fairly rapidly, and some things do come in hot and some things come in cool, and you got time to work on them. It's just part of my job. So I certainly don't dislike it, but of course I would like to have 2 years to work on every single room in this house. You know, that would be great. There's something at some point you've got to give up your baby and send it out into the world, and you're always a little bit annoyed that it might be a little bit buck-toothed, you know, but you do your best to get it out there.
Exactly. Annie wants to know, what are some of the games that inspire you, graphic lighting wise?
Wow, that's a great question. I honestly tend to look at, for most of my lighting reference, I look at film or photography. I think you can't beat the vast history of cinema in lighting, because we're more or less doing the same thing in games. It's just a different challenges and different different technology and different tools, but ultimately what we're doing is creating cinematic images, and we're using a language that an audience has already been familiar with. We all grew up watching movies and TV shows, and there's things like rim lights, backlighting, that kind of stuff in the real world might seem a bit weird and fake if you saw it, but we've been well trained in that vocabulary. So I tend to get most of my stuff from there. But one of the games that stands out to me as having just gorgeous lighting was the Wolfenstein game that came out a couple of years ago. I can't even remember the name of it now. It was what was it? It was the Wolfenstein reboot. But that game, I just had some beautiful lighting, and it had some really cool stuff in there so this was a bit of an eye opener for me. I remember you get into the secret base, and I walked into this kind of living area, and there was this beautiful warm light. That's it. Yeah. And there was this beautiful warm light in this room, and I looked for the light source, and there was no light source. So the artist just knew that it would look beautiful to have this warm light there, so they put the light there, and they didn't worry about the fact that there was no source for that light. And that, to me, I had some OCD with that for a while. Like, I would get really bugged. I'd be like, oh, I don't want to, I want light here, but there's no light source. What am I going to do with that? And then ultimately, again, that's another language of cinema, that, you're running through a dark forest at night, and there's a giant blue spotlight shining on you. Like that light's not coming from anywhere, but we're trained in that language. So learning to let go of this need to have everything feel really realistic and grounded was a challenge for me. But I think they did amazingly in that Wolfenstein game. That's the one that really jumps out to me. I'm looking at my game list now, and I'm trying to find something else that really stands out. I think Blizzard do amazing lighting work. I mean, they're very stylized, but they have a kind of consistent look. I love the lighting in Diablo. Bloodborne, I think Bloodborne has beautiful lighting. It's very kind of very bleak and desolate, and really sets the mood. Destiny, I think Destiny has some really cool tech going on in Destiny. I mean, they keep the frame rate really high and have these beautiful open spaces and wonderful color palettes. Yeah, I think there's some really good lighting out there that I definitely appreciate, but I get most of my reference from film and photography.
Cool. How do you get good looking fluid real-time renders?
Fluids. Okay, cool. So most of the look of a fluid, it depends, right? So some fluid effects are handled by effects exclusively, like dripping water and stuff like that. But fluid surfaces like puddles and stuff like that, we're just trying to sell the effect of wetness. So it's all about the specularity on the surface. Now, I don't have a lot of control over that. The material artist will deal with like the surface tension and where the surface of the puddle will kind of give way to wet concrete and then dry concrete. And there's some really cool math and shader work that goes into getting that looking realistic. Basically, I deal with the specularity of those surfaces by putting cube maps in, and sometimes I cheat them. So sometimes I'll make those cube maps really physically inaccurate, just so you get this really nice shimmer in a puddle as you walk past.
Cool. How do you take the attention of the player to a point in a fluid and natural way? And other way to phrase it is like, how do you guide a player's, how do you guide a player through the game with lighting or through lighting?
Contrast. It's all about contrast. So a player will notice a dark space in a light area or a light space in a dark area. Pulling out forms. So for example, here you can see in this shot, you can see your eyes kind of drawn to the end of the hallway because it gets dark. We have a light space, then a dark space, then another light space. And that contrast and those patterns create visual interest. Sometimes we have special challenges. I don't know, you may have all seen our reveal of the Uncharted DLC. And it's a very dark space, and there's an interior that has almost no artificial lighting, and that's nighttime. So there's no natural lighting coming in the windows either. So a lot of that was using specularity to pull the player's eyes around. So putting a fake speck on a wall so that the player kind of catches some glimmer of surface there and looks at that spot. And we'll play it through, and we'll get other people to play it through, and people will point out areas where players get lost, and we go back to it and we revise. But it's all about the contrast, like having my favorite trick, and it's such a cheesy trick to me, it feels, because I kind of do it over and over again, is having a light around a corner. So you'll be in a hallway and there's a light spilling into the hallway from somewhere else. And so there's a kind of a curiosity in me as a player. I want to know where that light is coming from. I want to know what that space looks like, especially if it's casting some interesting shadows. It kind of gives you a sense, some foreshadowing of what is coming up. So I do this a lot, and I'm kind of laughing at myself because it does feel like a cheesy trick, but it's my go-to solution. If you're in a spot and I need you to know where to go, I'm going to put a light around the corner. That's
Yeah,
that's it.
cool. And we're coming up on time, guys. I know there's tons of questions, but we're going to get a couple of more. So Roman wanted to know if there are any books that you could recommend.
Oh, there are, and I can't
Oh,
remember the
it's
name
actually
of them any
or
right
can.
now.
Yeah.
I have a stack of books on my desk, and I honestly can't remember the name of any of them right now. But there's certainly books on cinematic lighting are really good. There's a handful that are really well known. Uh, they tend to deal a lot more with setting up cinematic lights, like they get a little bit technical in ways that don't directly apply to us. But again, most of my reference comes from studying photography and cinematography. So
Yeah.
anything on photography, anything on cinematography, literally watch a lot of films, take
Yeah.
screenshots, look at the screenshots and figure out what the light is doing in those screenshots. Because in terms of actually like physically lighting, like getting your hands dirty in mire and adding lights and hitting render and stuff like that, there are some tutorials out there on YouTube, and my course will be covering a lot of that. Uh,
So Roman recommended Framed Ink. I haven't heard of that one.
I haven't heard of that one either, but I'll
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah, I got to check that one out. So, speaking of your course, we have a couple of questions for that. What should someone expect to get from the course, and what type of scenes they're going to be working on?
Okay, so we're going to be working on a large variety of scenes, indoor and outdoor, some diorama type spaces so we can focus on different aspects of lighting and materials. We're going to be looking a little at what I was talking about earlier, where you can build very simple scenes and make them look super pretty. So I think that's a really useful thing, because I know that there's a tendency with tutorials, at least for me, where I want to jump into a tutorial and come out with a portfolio piece. But the goal is to give you the tools that allow you to make all of your pieces for portfolio pieces. So I'll be talking about art, science, and technology, and then just practically showing examples of, here's a hallway. How can we light this hallway? What if it's daytime? What if it's nighttime? What if it has to be dark? What if it has to be light? What if the player has to navigate through this door? What if the player can't navigate through that door? What kind of things are we going to be looking at to solve those problems? Also, I'll be talking about like light ratios, like getting your exposure, your sun and your sky feeling really nice, and demonstrating how you can go for completely different aesthetics just by tweaking those values. So uh, you should definitely be able to come out of this course, whether you're an independent game developer, if you want to work in cinema, if you want to work for AAA, if you've got a game, if you've got scenes, if you're a modeler that wants to light your scenes well, if you want to light cutscenes, if the goal is
Someone
to
is an
cover all of
interior
this.
designer.
Yeah, for sure. You should be. I
Yeah,
mean, this is all of this applies. Like uh, it's all about lighting your spaces so that they look good. And I would hope that every single person coming out of this course could take that information and apply it directly to the work they're doing, whatever it is. So, because we're the last step in the pipe, and unless you're working in illustrated 2D, you're gonna have to deal with lighting in some way. And the goal is to give you all the tools that, so whatever you go on to do, you're going to understand enough about lighting that you can take all of your hard work leading up to lighting and really showcase it with really solid lighting.
definitely. And I'm sorry, guys, and this is something that happens all the time. It's like, there's just way more questions than we have time, so I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. But before we leave, Boon, I just wanted to see if you had any, just last bit of advice for just the audience here.
Geez, I don't know. I mean, there's going to be lots and lots of technical advice that I just can't cover now. There's not enough time. But
No, just
in
advice in
terms,
general.
be passionate and be interested, and don't give up on it. If like some little country boy from Australia can end up at Naughty Dog when the last thing I worked on was an iOS game, like be passionate and be yourself, be authentic, look for things that interest you, uh, work hard. Please work hard. Nothing comes easily, right? Like you've got to work hard. That's just the reality. I wish I could show you my first lighting reel. I just, it should be floating around somewhere. I'd like to release it someday and just I'd die laughing looking at it. But yeah, definitely, like just be passionate. I don't.
Yeah.
It,
No,
it sounds like I should be displaying a picture of a kitten when I'm saying this, right? Like it's one of those motivational posters, but it's true. It's the truth. Every single person I work with is this. They're passionate. They're interested. They take ownership. They're really interested in learning. Actually, that's a good one. Be hungry for knowledge. Go read a lot. That's probably where I got most of my stuff. I'd like, even, an interesting article pops up, learning how the retina like translates photons into electronic signals to the brain. Does that help me be a better lighting artist? Not really, but it makes me understand this art form and this science and this technology better. So
I completely agree.
yeah.
Agree. Well, Boon, thank you so much for just taking the time, out of your weekend to enlighten us.
Enlighten us. Well done.
Process. Yeah. Like that?
I did. Were you waiting the entire session to use that?
I was just itching to try to get this. I was like, come on. Well, thank you again, guys. And this is Manny signing off, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.